and the opportunity to record. As we get more technological savvy and ready, we'll be doing a live stream so that we can accommodate those who are unable to physically be present to be able to watch our talks that we'll be having throughout the academic year. The motivation for doing the seminars is to give us an opportunity to see what research is happening, give folks the time to present in spaces with colleagues that we don't typically get to do. It's really helpful for us to understand each other's research. We cross paths in many ways. However, to see it come to life through each research team, I think is quite a beautiful thing to observe. Often this is done at conferences, and a lot of work is done behind the scenes in offices, behind computer screens, and small research group meetings, but to be able to see what's been happening over the last several months and to see this research take legs and arms and really begin to impact the community in different ways is important for us, to inspire us and to help us think of other ways where we can begin to be more innovative as we move towards a more research-driven institution. So this is our way of beginning this effort, and we will continue to do more. Your feedback, your contribution, your engagement with the team as they present today is definitely appreciated. So don't be shy about asking questions. Definitely engage them with your full attention and your interest. This is a big deal to be able to share with your colleagues, and I hope that we get more of a rotation, whether for those of you who are here or others who are not will come through and sign up to be able to present the work. But I do appreciate this time with all of you, and I hope that you all will be able to engage and get a lot out of this group. Good, you're ready. How you doing? Good to see you. Glad to see folks here. So I'm going to turn it over to Raphael, and the other mic I'm going to rest.
Hi everyone. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for the opportunity for us to present. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. So thank you so much for the opportunity to present on our research and our work. The study that we're going to talk about today, or the work that we're going to talk about today, is very preliminary in nature, in the sense that the goal. Should we switch the microphone?
Yeah.
Yeah. You think so? All right. So the work that we're going to present on today is preliminary in nature, in the sense that it's almost like a needs assessment that we are doing to see what future needs are needed at the district for future research. And there is a grant that is involved, a grant application that is involved to that. So what you're seeing here is the start of what we consider to be a very major relationship between Kane University and one of our larger districts in the state of New Jersey. We're going to try the best of our ability not to mention the district, but even with the dissemination of our findings, maybe today, but definitely in the future, the characteristics of the district really leads to its identification always, right? Because of just the nature of that district, its size, and the population of students and families that it services. Without further ado, the title of our research is Parent and Therapist Perceptions of Teletherapy during the COVID-19 pandemic. And today we're really going to focus on a lot of the results that came out of the parent data collection. Here's a little agenda of what we're hoping to cover, and the idea is that we're going to have hopefully about 20 minutes for the Q&A at the end, so that everyone can ask the questions that you may have about our research. But I'm going to introduce the research team, and I'm going to give a very brief description of the initiative, and then we're going to dive right into the findings from the parent survey, and then we're going to finish off with next steps. Where are we going from here? Right before that Q&A. So our research team. The first person on our research team is Dr. Joanne Cascio from Speech. And Dr. Cascio has been really instrumental with the data analysis aspect, and really the building the instruments that we use to collect data, and also analyzing the qualitative data that we gather. Dr. Stephen Lacasio actually helped us develop our instruments in addition to other folks. He helped us put those instruments together, making sure that the questions or the items that were found in those two surveys, the therapist and the parent survey, really aligned well with the purpose of our study, our research, and the research questions that we had formulated. Dr. Lacasio was also very instrumental in keeping all the parties involved in this process aware of each other's presence and each other's needs. And that goes from like legal at both the district and at Kean University to the dean's office to everybody in between. So it's actually a pretty big endeavor that he helps us with there. Dr. Thomas Cox is from OT and PT, I'm sorry, PT. And Dr. Cox has been instrumental and is currently very instrumental in our efforts to apply for a grant. We will be applying for a major Spencer grant in December. We have the LOI that we'll be submitting in the next week or two. And he's been very instrumental with that process and making sure that we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's when it comes to that. Dr. Marianne Moran, who is here with us today, has been instrumental in helping build the instruments alongside Dr. Cassia and Dr. Lacasio. And Dr. Moran is also our quantitative guru on the team. So she's looking at all the numerical data, crunching those numbers, and seeing what the findings are. She'll be presenting on some of that today. She's also really strong with Excel and data management, which is a very important skill. So a lot of that data cleanup, she's really been able to support us there. And Dr. Carrie Giordano, alongside Dr. Cox, has been instrumental with the grant piece of all of this and making sure that that information is well aligned to the purpose of the team, of the research, and that it's aligned to what the Spencer Foundation is looking for. And Dr. Giordano has really spearheaded a lot of those meetings with the Kean Foundation and our team and the Dean's office to make sure that all parties are well aware of what's needed and where we are in the process. And that's me, Dr. Rafael Nanoa. I benefit from the hard work of everybody else, so that's really my role. But initially, I was working with this person, Dr. Shirley Fonseca from the district. She is the supervisor of special education there. And she came to me, it's actually a mutual acquaintance, one of our students at the doctoral level, introduced me to her because she wanted to build a research agenda. As a practitioner, she also wanted to build a strong research agenda. And the first couple of months of that relationship was really her and I talking about, well, what do you want to research? What do you want to do? And from those discussions, this idea came of looking into teletherapy. And from there, this team was formed in order to help support those research interests. So that's really the role that I play in all this alongside Dr. Fonseca, who is really like the backbone and the connection to the district. And just a little bit about some of the studies. So like I mentioned at the opening, this is really a needs assessment. So when we started, when we decided where do we start from, we said, well, let's start at the beginning. Let's get a real understanding of what's happening in terms of teletherapy and services during the pandemic with the families and the therapists at the district. And what we were able to do, we were able to put together 2 instruments through SurveyMonkey, anonymous. The participants remained anonymous, and we blasted those out to therapists and parents who received these services for their children during the spring semester of this year. And throughout the summer and a little bit into September, we gathered data. We were able to get data from about 130 parents. The parent survey was in English, in Spanish, and it was in Portuguese. And about 130 responded. Most of them were the English survey respondents. We didn't get as many Spanish or Portuguese respondents as we thought we did. So that's something we're going to look into in the future as well. We want to make sure that all parents and families' voices are heard. But we got about 130, which we were very pleasantly surprised. And for the therapists, we got about 35. We thought we would get a little bit more than that, but I will say that from those 35 that we received, there were some open-ended items on that survey, and the therapists did a great job of really providing detailed information. So even though there were only 35 versus the 130 for the parents, the wealth of information that was gathered across those 35 surveys, I think is going to be very helpful and continues to be very helpful for our initiative. So without further ado, we're going to talk about some results from the parent survey, and I'm going to open it up to our colleague, Dr. Moran.
Thank you very much. I just want to preface that my engagement in this this research project has been very, very interesting to me. I finished a research project last year about telehealth and occupational therapy, and it was really geared to therapists and their efficacy and how they felt their jobs were for OT. And the other half was on parents, but these parents were receiving therapy in a private outpatient clinic. So to be able now to look at it from a school-based setting was very interesting to me. So this is like almost a continuation of the project that I started and completed last year. So that was exciting. We asked a lot of different kinds of questions, and you know, with every survey, you wish you could rewrite those questions after you review what you've got. But we did get some interesting information I thought I would share with you. The first is that most parents reported their children got 30 to 60 minutes of therapy a week, OT, PT, speech, combination kind of a thing. And that most parents feel their child only missed 4 sessions. That's 61%. And that's pretty, I thought that was pretty high. Another 24 stated they missed no more than 9. So under 9 sessions was most of the students for telehealth at home. So I think that was pretty significant. And most parents, 69%, felt their children were receiving therapy as prescribed in their IEP. And I thought that was helpful. We also want to look at the barriers to the parents' engagement in telehealth and what kinds of things they were encountering to find out if we, on our side, could help get over some of those, especially not knowing what was going to happen in the future. So I rated the barriers based on the number of individuals that strongly agreed or agreed that these were barriers. So the first one was having reliable access to internet, which is like, I'm not surprised. The second one was that the therapist was able to accommodate time conflicts, which is a big issue because not only did they have OT, but they had PT, speeches, and the teachers. The third one, 60%, was she was able to fit telehealth into their daily schedule. So not only the schedule of the individuals receiving all the therapy, but the family's schedule as well. And there were other children in the home that they're responsible for during telehealth, and there's 50% of that. And then 48% said they were able to easily navigate technology required during the services. And then 43, they had work conflicts. So those were the barriers that were most common. And based on some of the grants that we had been looking at, most are looking at a disparity component to the grants. So then they went and analyzed the same information based on what they reported as the race that they identified with. Either, and there were 4 categories that were chosen of our parents. 52% identified with Black or African American, 38% identified with Hispanic or Latino, 4% white, and 1% Asian Pacific. So I looked at the 2 larger groups to find out what if there was any difference between what we had found as a collective and what the individual groups had identified. So the differences I found were things that I saw were more than a 10% difference in the answers. So the first one was on the telehealth, how many sessions you missed. And so in 10 or more, the Black and African American families stated they missed 21%, where the Hispanic and Latino said 7%. That's a big disparity to me that they said that. Next one. How satisfied were you with it? So I thought this was interesting. Of the Black and African American, 30 and 19% were very satisfied or satisfied. Latino was 52 and 21, almost over 70% were satisfied. So I thought that was a big discrepancy. Yeah. Some more. The progress being made. Again, Hispanic and Latino were again over 70% compared to the Black and African American. So that was a difference I saw. Just as a point of reference, Hispanic and Latino didn't have 100%. One parent did not answer a couple questions. And then this was interesting. Would you prefer your child stop participating in telehealth and wait until school became in session? And again, 38% of the Black and African American versus 18% of the Hispanic Latin. So I thought that was interesting. And then the last one was, if you had the opportunity to continue telehealth services, which would you choose? And again, the Hispanic Latino, again, yes, 71% wanted to continue some type of telehealth. I thought that was interesting. And then we have qualitative.
So for the qualitative findings, so the instruments were really quantitative in nature. Most of the items on the instrument were Likert scale items. However, there were some open-ended questions, and to our pleasant surprise, a lot of the families and the therapists really gave a wealth of narrative information or answers to those open-ended questions. So that led to some heavy-duty qualitative analysis of that narrative to see what trends we're finding. So the first thing, the first table here is the number of references by Likert scale response. So everything that I'm going to just show here in the next couple of slides has to do with one question. And that one question was, how satisfied are you with teletherapy? And the Likert scale responses were from very satisfied to very dissatisfied, as you can see up on the screen. The number of references are chunks of text that we associated with each of these. So for the very satisfied folks, there were about 41 number of chunks of text that we pulled that gave us some significant information as to why they chose that answer. That was 25 for satisfied, 25 for neither, 11 for dissatisfied, and 8 for very dissatisfied. The reason that you see a larger number in the very satisfied versus the very dissatisfied, it kind of starts tapering off, is because there were more parents who chose very satisfied and satisfied as opposed to dissatisfied and very dissatisfied. So there were more chunks of text, largely because there were just more parents choosing that item. And from that narrative, categories emerged. And one of the interesting findings that we looked at was the fact that for very satisfied and for satisfied apiece, there were 4 categories that emerged, meaning there were 4 different groups that helped explain that level of satisfaction for those parents. Even though there was less references in dissatisfied and very dissatisfied, and even in neither, when you group together very and just satisfied, there were more categories. What that means is that for these folks, even though there were less individuals here, they were providing more reasons, more different types of reasons as to why they felt the way they felt about teletherapy services. So let's try to jump into some of what those categories are for these folks. So the table number 2 is open response categories for quantitative responses, very and just satisfied, right? And what we saw is for very satisfied, we had 4, like I mentioned before in the previous table, we had 4 categories here. Those 4 categories are satisfied with services and provider, academic and educational progress, provided emotional support, and the last one down here, parent involvement or engagement, just one parent there, but it was in our opinion, different from all the rest, so it built its own category. And then just for the satisfied, there was a lot of overlap in terms of the first 3 categories being found there as well. There was a new category, prefers in person. So we didn't see that with the very satisfied. That makes sense because the parents that are saying, hey, I'm satisfied, I'm not very satisfied, they're giving us the reason why they're not very satisfied in terms of I prefer in person, that being the reason why. And then parent involvement or engagement didn't we didn't find that it dissatisfied folks. And here's some textual examples of the chunks of text that we categorized. So just looking at the first one, we're only looking at satisfied with services and providers. There were 25, if I can add, 11 and 14, there were 25 chunks of text that we pulled. And from there, we actually built some extra subcategories. So when we talk about satisfied with services and provider, well, what is it about the services of the provider that leads you to be satisfied? They're caring, they're patient, they're timely, they present good communication, they're organized, and they're engaging. And there were 4 references made on the very satisfied group versus 2 for satisfied for being caring. That's the one that won, if you will, right? That's the one that was referenced the most. They go above and beyond. Therapist was attentive and always had a positive attitude. Patient, there was 2 in the very satisfied column. Providers were patient. They always take their time. Timely, there was 1. Therapists are always punctual. And then the rest, we did some in vivo coding because there was really only 1 person. So some of the same words were found. Good communication, organized, engaging. And that's how those came to be. And then this is our dissatisfied and very dissatisfied. As you can tell, more categories, even though less parents. And those were child not receptive to services, scheduling conflicts and time constraints, technical and connectivity issues. There were positive sentiments. And what that means is that 2 parents, I think it was 2, yeah, it was 2 parents, and they chose, I'm very dissatisfied with teletherapy, but their response was, teletherapy was great. So what that leads us to believe, our interpretation of that is, oh, you selected very dissatisfied by mistake. That was probably an error. But we did keep it there because that's what they chose and that's what they said. So there are some positive sentiments as a category there. Inconsistent services, lack of academic or educational progress, not measuring child's progress, and unrealistic demands for parents. Those last 4 there, actually those last 3 there was just 1 textual reference, which would be just 1 parent that said that. For a child not receptive to services, we didn't build a table. There weren't enough quotes for that, and the quotes that we did have, they were a little bit long, so we just present those here. Child not receptive for services was the most referenced category for those parents who chose dissatisfied and very dissatisfied. And here's an exemplary quote. My child is developmentally delayed with a possible diagnosis of ASD. With communication and language, it is hard to get my child to sit and participate without human interaction. She is not getting what she needs from the sessions. These responses also reference drawbacks of therapy being delivered virtually and for younger children. So we actually saw that was a trend across these responses. And here's an example of that. My child got very anxious in front of the computer. So they would talk a lot about that. In front of the computer, it's hard for them to remain engaged. And barely wanted to sit down for regular school sessions. Therapy is hard remotely for my 6-year-old. There were at least 3 references made to the child's age for these people that felt negatively about it. And when that reference was made, it was always younger children. And neither, I left this one for last because this one really gave us a great wealth of information. So almost like leaving the best for last, right? So those people on the fence, I'm not satisfied, not dissatisfied, I'm somewhere in the middle. Well, what are some of the categories that emerged? Some of them were similar: child not receptive to services, lack of academic or educational progress, preferred in person, scheduling conflict, and then there were 2 new ones. Mixed experiences and inconsistent services were 2 that were new in this category and not found in others. Here's some of our examples. Child was frustrated and sad. Child didn't feel it was effective. That's the child not being receptive of the services. My child is the same, or child has not progressed enough. That lack of progress, because it was done remotely. And so, why do you feel this way? Because it was done remotely. So that's why we put preferred in person, right? Teletherapy is not as effective as in person. So that's somebody just directly saying that, right? Scheduling conflict, no interest in scheduling sessions that would be best for the family. There were 2 different parents that shared that sentiment. Mixed experiences, because my child did really well with speech, my child did okay with OT. PT was rough for my child, so that's that mixed experiences example. And then inconsistent services, the services are not consistent. That was that 1 person. Okay, so that draws the end of our data presentation. Dr. Nakasa? Sorry.
So the questions we asked, you saw a lot of the answers, but I would have loved to have been able to redo the survey, like with every survey that you ever give, you want to do it again and better. Like I would love to have the speech graded differently than the OT or the PT, being much more physical. We saw that with the speech therapists feeling more confident in telehealth versus OT and PT. So I'd have loved to have done that. I would love to have known how many kids and what age each of the kids were. We did not ask that of the parents, but I would have liked to have known that. We asked what services they received, but not their ages. I think that's a big part of telehealth. Older students may do better. We didn't ask diagnoses, we just had parents whose children had IEPs, and that was it. So next time we go through, we'd like to embellish, improve our survey and redo it again. So that's what I want to do in my next step.
Tell me I have to stand in front of the camera. So next steps, where do we go from here? So this was sort of born, as Dr. Noah had indicated, by, can you turn it towards me? So I'm not like saying, by an individual coming to us and expressing a want and a need to become more involved with research, and we jumped on it. And we formalized the process, as Dr. Noah had indicated, and we worked with our legal, we worked with their legal, and we have a formalized written articulation agreement with this district. And what that means is this is just the first endeavor of many to come that we are going to have with this district. And this articulation agreement is going to allow us to expand into other things. One of the things that Dr. Noah had indicated that we have 2 people who are working on a grant. It's a $400,000 grant. That money is going to be used to expand and go beyond what we're doing and maybe help them and look into other projects and things that they are working on as well. So we view this as just a stepping stone into what will become and what will be. You know, we're looking at going to this district, sharing with them in a similar fashion what we have done with you here today, a little bit more extensive. These are preliminary. We'll put a little more work into this, but share with them because they are interested in knowing what did you guys find, what's going on there. Because depending upon what we tell them, there could be programmatic change in what they decide to do moving forward. So we will be presenting this to them, and if they should say to us, do you have any ideas, or do you have any suggestions, of course we will be open to that, and we will provide that platform for them. We will also be hopefully putting together some kind of formalized manuscript that we will put together, and again, we do have somebody from the district, and so collectively it'll be something that's a combined effort between those 2 things. And then finally, the overarching thing of all of this, Dean Thorpe, who's not here currently, one of the things that she had a vision for was to create an institute. And this institute was going to sort of be like a research institute, a think tank. It was sort of not defined, and I'm not sure it's 100% defined just yet either. But in our quest to become an R2 institution, this was going to be the start, and the graduate college, the Nathan Weiss Graduate College, was going to be the start of this. And so it's our vision that this endeavor will live inside of that institute, and we will have other things from other departments and other research initiatives that will also live inside this. When we submit for the grants, you know, grants are tricky. So in the event that we do not receive that grant, we will utilize that same information and we will seek another venue of a funding stream. So that's really what we are hoping to move forward. We are looking for a prosperous relationship with this district. We're also, you know, our health professions here at Nathan Weiss have clinics and whatnot, and maybe opening things up in that way and just really forging a relationship with this particular district.
One of the other things that we really looked at when we did the professional survey was the interaction between the professionals, OT, PT, speech, psychology, and counseling. And I think one of the things that we really want to do is work more on that interdisciplinary aspect, especially with coming from the Nathan West Graduate College, as hopefully we become a healthcare. But anyway, that's one big part of what we are doing with the survey, and there's very interesting results about that interaction. And one of the things that we did, again, you do a survey and you said, why did we forget to survey these people? We did not survey the teachers, and the teachers are an integral part of the interdisciplinary team. So we need to get to them and find out what they feel about it.
Thanks. So I think we're going to open it up to questions. Yes, Dr. Noah?
Wonderful pilot. I had a question around your decision to group Black and African American together, given that African American, is a very specific cultural group, and Black could be lots of different cultural groups. And then related to that, I was wondering about language and whether these parents spoke English as a first language or not, and the extent to which those things may have affected the results. Thank you.
So when building the survey and the instrument, we did that with the guidance of Dr. Fonseca from the district. And what we're using the language that parents are most accustomed to. So I think you bring up a very valid and strong point in terms of those two terms, Black and African American, and what does it mean to different individuals, and in the context of research, in the context of our professional fields, what do those terms mean in the context of like the U.S. Census, what have you, right? But what we did was on the onset, when we were building those instruments, Dr. Fonseca said, this is what we use at a district level, and when parents are given documents at the district level, these are the options that they're given. So we really tried to mirror that, and what we would do at that point, so taking the point that you just gave us, we would have that discussion with Dr. Fonseca and say, okay, how do you believe that parents internalize these terms, and how do they identify with them? And in the future, that may be future research within that specific district, right? To really understand how parents identify across those terms. But to answer your question, that was the reasoning behind choosing the terms and packaging them the way that they were packaged.
Yeah, and I think the specific terminology was familiar to them. Yeah. So this was something that they had seen over time. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It was about language. Do you have information on what percentage of these parents spoke English as a first language?
So readily available on hand right now to share, no. At the district level, yes, right? So Dr. Fonseca, as the supervisor of special education, does house that information from a district perspective.
I was thinking more in
terms of this, we blasted out the survey in English, Spanish, and in Portuguese, right? I keep wanting to say Creole. Yeah. English, Spanish, and Portuguese, based on the families that are serviced. The vast majority of the parents, I mean, we have about 130, ballpark figure, close to 100, really completed the survey in English.
Well, how was it disseminated, the survey?
SurveyMonkey was an anonymous link.
Through the
But they could need access to
the district did it.
So through Dr. Fonseca's office, she has a listserv of all the parents whose children receive teletherapy services. So those were the parents who were shared the link to the informed consent and the survey. But it was 100% anonymous. And aside from what language they completed the survey in, and those questions that we asked, we really did. I think that's one of the things that we're going to try to do in the future is really get some more of that demographic information.
Okay.
Thank you, that's good feedback.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for that wonderful research. My name is Jonathan Zasku over at Counselor Ed Department. One of the questions that I had was, in terms of the data collection period, was that more the front end of the pandemic or towards the tail end?
Well, can I?
And then I have one more after.
I thought it was very interesting. It was a district that was not in person for over 13 months. So they had a lot of opportunity for telehealth, and it wasn't one of these ones that went back early and hybrid and all that kind of stuff. So it was done, I think they went back in April, it was done in this very late spring. So they were pretty, and we really want to get it out while they were still very fresh in our mind, but they went.
We were rushing to make sure, because we didn't want them
Yes.
to forget what it was like. Yeah.
Absolutely. They know that sometimes initially at the front end, parents are very appreciative that there was accommodations made to give the continuity, and then towards the tail end, they start to lose wind.
Right.
So that's why I was curious about the data collection.
It was at the end, yeah.
Yeah.
And we were approached, you know, it was also this agreement that we went into it with them. It didn't happen at its inception either. It was midway through, so, yeah.
Great, thank you. The second that I wondered, and it has more to do with the household composition of these families. Is there some information whether it was a single parent or
Did
two?
not, again, I wish we
Okay.
had more
Sure, no, no
demographics,
worries.
yes, but that was one of the things I would have asked.
Sure, sure. I mean, I did some dissertation research on parental stress and some of these elements of life stressors and all those details in terms of family composition really do highlight the difference and how open they are to supporting their child with therapy. So, but thank you very much.
Yeah.
And you know, on the onset of all this, when we were trying to develop, when we were developing the surveys, some of those demographic questions did come up. And it was a new partnership with the district and Kean University. And like I said, it's a needs assessment, and we're trying to get a feel for what questions are seen as appropriate and whatnot. And not to say that those questions would not have been appropriate at this point in time, because the relationship is stronger. I think those questions now become more appropriate. And with follow-up surveying, we're going to add some of those like nitty-gritty. Tell us really about the family dynamic now. But in the beginning, I think we scared ourselves off and trying to be just cautious with the types of questions that we're asking and how are we going to be received as a new research team coming into the district.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is John Lee from Physical Therapy Department. Thank you very much for today for sharing your information, because I think this is a really important part of research, especially around this time. So I'm really glad that this is being addressed. I have two-part questions too, but first one's about the clinician part of the survey. I was wondering if any of the data was collected in terms of their clinicians' training, confidence, and efficacy, and then how, if there was any findings related to that type of information. Only because my interest is how telehealth is being conceptualized right now. Is it more of a techniques that we're studying, or is it more the cultural competency that's going to affect the outcomes? So I was wondering if there has been any investigations or questions related to.
I'll take first. So we didn't ask that. What we asked for was their years of experience, and what was their years of experience in school and in practice. And then we also asked, were they directly employed by the district, or were they employed by an outside agency? Because the district is so large, not everybody is employed by the district proper. So that was where it ended. It was how many years they have as clinicians and how many years do they have as school-based clinicians. Oh, here.
I agree 100%. The study that I did with the OTs only, we looked exactly at that. Their competency, the effectiveness of treatment, and what they felt was with telehealth versus in person. And it was, again, outpatient. And I'd be glad to share those with you and work with you further.
And it's almost really funny, because my second question was for Dr. Moran to see if there has been any similarities or differences with the findings between the school-based or if any highlights of interesting facts.
They were dramatically different. For one thing, one was a suburban private practice. And again, anybody who goes to private practice versus just relying on school therapy is very, very different. So the answers were completely different. And some of the barriers were the same, but the satisfaction and the future of what they want were very different. And I'm glad to share that with you too.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Any other analysis that you think that you'd like to see? We've heard some of the things that I've looked at. I'm always looking for other things to look at.
Since you asked that question, so I was going to ask something, but thank you for asking the question. So I'll offer, and maybe you've already done it. So you talked about barriers, and then you talked about the disparities.
Yes.
I was just wondering if you're gonna look at the correlation between barriers and disparities and the racial.
I don't know what disparity would be. Like,
When you were talking about there's disparities, when you were talking about attendance at sessions, and so those
Those are
numbers,
barriers, yeah.
looking at those numbers in relation to, the barriers and then the racial cultural identity.
there was no difference in the racial disparity, in the racial identification of individuals in that area.
Okay, so you did look at the correlation. I'm just asking you that.
I looked at every, I did the whole, he says Excel, I also do SPSS, but I throw it in Excel first and then an SPSS and then go back and
I
forth.
was actually more in relation to the barriers. I don't know.
Yeah.
I probably not being very clear.
Then I went through and I divided the group into the different areas by what they identified as race, and then I read every single one again, and I analyzed each question again to see, and I was looking for anything that was more than a 10% difference between the different groups. Question?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you did the study during the pandemic, and you're going to go through one more in depth with it. Do you expect different outcomes? I mean, and you know, of what you're going to ask. I mean, because it's going to be a totally new situation.
I think, I expected most of the things that we saw, except the satisfaction one. I was surprised how many people were satisfied. I mean, I think that as an OT, I want to do in person.
And that's what I mean. You're going through that, people in the pandemic, so anything they can get, they're going to be, thank you so much.
Yes, yeah, and I
Whereas
think,
now they have a choice.
right. Yeah, and most of them, and the choices that they still want, they weren't totally against telehealth after having the experience of it.
But part of it could be, thank you so much. But the other piece could be, it's also a significant burden or time, I don't want to, maybe burden's a negative connotation, but a significant time commitment for those parents, because let's face it, especially the younger ones, they have to be there. They have to make sure that their child is logged on. You know, with speech, it might be a little bit more user-friendly, but when you get into your OT and your PT, they're actually helping with the manipulation of the child and the movement of the child.
And one of the other things that we studied on the professional side is how engaged they felt the parents were. And I thought that was pretty significant. And again, I don't have that, we didn't put that data here, but I do have all that data as well. And I thought that was very telling.
And also a major interest of our work and our future work in relationship to the grant that we're applying to is interprofessionalism amongst the therapists. So we all hope that we don't go back to the need for teletherapy and that, you know, this whole COVID thing subsides. And if it does, I mean, our research does go on, and really our focus really then becomes or centralizes around that interprofessionality and how can, you know, therapists across the board just work together to support the families. And that's the focus of the grant.
I think when we talk about school-based and having the parents having to be engaged with the students and they can't do it alone, that we thought that would be really high. And we didn't get that too much from the satisfaction survey on the parent side. And we didn't, it came up in some of the satisfaction, but we directly asked it of the professionals. So it'll be interesting to see what all that analysis is. I can't remember.
So, Peggy Sue from School Nursing. I was wondering about, I came in a little late, my apologies for that. Thank you for the presentation. So it sounds like the numbers were about 130 answers, give or take. Are you thinking about, especially if you stay with quantitative survey type things, are you thinking about moving to other school districts to enlarge those numbers? Because if you start breaking down the racial profiles and cultural groups more, you don't have enough numbers even really for what you've got. So I'm wondering if you're moving on to including other groups, especially looking at those cultural and racial numbers.
And I think that's really important. I think the other thing we have to remember is the demographics of those school districts. And because they can be very different and the results could skew everything.
Well, you can use it for, you could deal with rates instead of percentages, because percentages are going to cause
Exactly.
chaos.
Yep.
Not really a question, but since you mentioned about something that I would love to see in the future would be, since we are getting a satisfaction study, if we can kind of tie that into the outcomes and see if there's any relationship between the patient satisfaction, and if we can kind of have that ongoing collaborations with local clinics or have that clinical outcome perspectives, and also kind of go piggybacking onto that pandemic specific situation that we're looking at. If we are recovering into the new normals and that we're getting data from more of an in-person or good choice therapies, we might be able to compare that data to what we have during the pandemic. And that might create a room for opportunity to create a targeted population or areas that we can create that scalable treatment target strategies. And I think that only because like within the early intervention, we're so short-staffed all the time, especially when it comes to school-based. I think if we can make that opportunities, they'll be really valuable to add on to the strategy.
I agree 100%. And also when I think about some of the processes that we're doing, we would love to have known what the progress was of those students, and that's a very hard number to come up with. Like we talked about this improvement on IEPs, on goals. Is it by discipline? It became a little bit too much for us to look at in what we're doing right now. But hopefully we'll be able to develop more research with this district.
And I think this answers the last, helps answer the last two questions that were asked. But again, this is, our work here is very foundational, and it's the starting stages of that. So the way that we administered that survey, because of that, it was a survey to a link to an anonymous survey that was blasted out to all families. And in that language, the separation between the research team and the district was primarily clear. Because we were just starting out. Now that we have that research articulation agreement, now that we've built a relationship, I will say that the district is large enough to get sample sizes that can lead to statistically significant results through data analysis, right? And we'll be able to hopefully get data directly from the district. So we'll be able to get family and student level data from the district directly for all of their students, not just for the 130 that would answer, some email blast. Even though we got 130 parents, I don't know what the percentage would be, but I would say that, well less than 10% of the parents who received that responded to it. So you can just think about the magnitude and the size of the district without us saying what district it is, but it is a district that does lend itself to this type of research and from a quantitative lens. So with those relationships being built, the hope is that, all right, give us this data for all of them, and let's look at what, and if we're going to do a survey or something of that nature, let's build it within the programming that you're doing for the students, so that the survey lives with the programming and gets in the hands of every single parent, and they know that it's tied to what the district is trying to do to support them. So, very exciting things in the future once that starts to happen.
Just the last point that I was thinking about, and very much in line with my colleague who just spoke, the need for those treatment gains in comparison to the consumption, just so that we get a sense of where's treatment going. And this kind of connects back to the cultural ethnic groups that you highlighted. One of the things that is important is ethnic or cultural or racial groups treatment exposure, like their history of receiving treatment. And so often with Latinos, they haven't had as long as a history of Black or African American. And so that becomes, they will more readily say, yes, this is great, this is great. And, as a bilingual therapist, I've definitely been on the receiving end of that. So just something to consider and think about as we move forward. It's very exciting.
Yeah, we talked about that.
We just had that conversation, so
Yeah,
yeah.
That's what I'm talking about, you just said that
Yeah, we were just talking about that yesterday,
Yeah.
yeah, that's great, thank you.
And it's very fun to be interdisciplinary, I'll just say that.
On the interdisciplinary lines, and I may have missed it, did you ask who was involved, or was this a set of kids that had OT speech and PT, and they had just that? Because I've done kids in home care where I was the nurse during full PT at home, which was a very different setting for a home bound child.
Was strictly school-based. Typically, schools get OT, PT, speech, and it's speech, OT, PT. Speech is the primary one. And then psychology and counseling, and those, so we have all 5 on there, and that's what we looked at.
Well, with very high-risk kids, I actually was in the school accompanying these kids to school as a nurse, doing their PT at school.
Yeah.
And other things. So that would be a very different setting, and you'd want to know about it then. And I'm just using that as a for instance.
Right.
Than a child who is getting OT from grandma when she can at home kind of thing. And I was just wondering who was involved with these kids and how multidisciplinary they were, and then how multidisciplinary the survey was.
Right. So we looked at what that school did, and we based it on that school system. I appreciate all of your comments and your interest. This is wonderful. Thank you.
I think we found an expert panel.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's excellent. If anything pops in your head, email us, because this is a fluid endeavor that we're in, so, yeah.
And we'll have to come back because you're dying to hear about the professionals. Any announcements?